Alone in the Dark 2024 is not some underappreciated masterpiece, but it is a smart and competently designed reimagining of the influential 1993 original. It plays as a third-person adventure, taking the same approach as Capcom's Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, and transforms a terribly aged classic into something that straddles the line between narrative-driven, puzzle-oriented walking sim and traditional survival horror. Think limited resources, weapon durability, gruesome monsters, and puzzling your way through a sprawling mansion full of unorthodox locks. Entering a market dominated by recognizable IP it once inspired, replicating the success of recent titles like the Resident Evil 4 remake or Alan Wake 2 was unlikely. However, as a AA style game priced accordingly, it sure as hell didn't deserve to do so badly. The developers Pisces Interactive was shut down a month after its launch. Like so many mid-tier and high-profile indie games released over the last decade, Alone in the Dark committed the unforgivable crime of just being good, rather than critically acclaimed. More often than not, a death sentence for IP and sometimes developers, and a modern video game market seemingly desperate to gorge itself to death on a never-changing buffet. Yes, the combat is clunky, but I'd argue every other element is good to great. The storytelling, the cast, the puzzles, and the thick atmosphere generated by the impressive visuals, ambience, and period-appropriate soundtrack. These are all essential components of a narrative-heavy horror game that takes you far beyond the walls of the Deserto Manor. Even the voice work, criticized by those I'll wager have not played beyond the opening chapter, is a great fit for the protagonists as they begin to question their own sanity and struggle with past trauma. When you throw in accessible gameplay mechanics, brisk narrative pacing, two playable characters with unique encounters, and multiple endings, Alone in the Dark gets far more right than wrong. Unfortunately, that means little in 2024, when talent and quality seem less important than the cosmic alignment of effective marketing, a quiet release period, and luck, if a game wants to stand out in a marketplace that's saturated, risk-averse, and increasingly dominated by the same established IP we've seen for decades. It's a shame, too, that so many reviewers and commentators casually dismiss games like Alone in the Dark as not good enough in contrast to its AAA peers, as survival horror fans are going to deprive themselves of one of the more interesting and stylishly told narratives in the genre. As a remake of sorts, Alone in the Dark 2024 obviously draws on concepts from the original, with ideas from Lovecraft novels and cliches you'd expect from a 1920s period piece, but it weaves them into a briskly paced narrative with plenty of reveals, red herrings, twists, scares, and cinematic flair. Aristocrat Emily Hartwood and grizzled PI Edward Carnby arrive at Deserto Manor looking for her eccentric uncle, who sent a confused letter about a dark man haunting him and the staff engaged in occult rituals. Unlike the original, in which he's already dead and the abandoned manor is filled with an assortment of creatures and spirits, the remake is set in a dilapidated mental health retreat, run by the condescending Dr. Gray and his evasive staff. Jeremy Hartwood has gone missing. Some of the patients and staff have died or disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and yet those who remain only seem interested in preparing for a yearly ritual that supposedly has Louisiana voodoo roots. After skulking through the creepy manor and encountering a few callbacks to the original, a search of Jeremy's room reveals the designs for a mysterious talisman, before the protagonist you choose is pulled into a nightmarish version of the New Orleans French Quarter, based on Jeremy's twisted memories and wild imagination. It's a slow but unsettling opening that suddenly changes pace and throws you in the deep end, setting the stage for how subsequent chapters will play out as you explore every inch of the manor and increasingly fantastical and often beautiful dreamscapes. The dual protagonist setup is designed for replays, despite functioning more like the original Resident Evil than Resident Evil 2's connected A-B scenarios. There is plenty of overlap when it comes to puzzles and progression, but the focus of the story changes, and, until the default finale, you're always left wondering if anything they experience is real. Emily sinks into melancholy as she deals with Dr. Gray's insinuations and tries to discover if the dark man haunting her uncle is an actual curse or just the manifestation of her family's mental health history. In contrast, Carnby spends more time investigating the cult-like activities of the staff, while becoming increasingly manic in his attempt to save Jeremy from an occult contract, seemingly to make up for past failings. During the opening chapters with identical puzzles and combat scenarios, the differences between Emily and Carnby feel limited to when and where they encounter the secondary cast, and the nature of their interactions, influenced by their personality, gender, and history. Whoever you're not playing with becomes a foil for the lead, seemingly oblivious to the supernatural elements and often a source of humour when their paths converge. The second of 5 chapters gives you a little freedom as to the path you take through the manor, but the payoff is the lengthy 4th chapter that lets you tackle 3 objectives in any order, and features a unique section for each protagonist that delves into their suppressed memories. If you want the full picture, or one of the 3 secret endings based on collectibles and optional interactions, 2 playthroughs are essential, and all the more enjoyable thanks to a New Game Plus update that adds in new encounters and some unexpected scares. What I'm getting at is don't leave games like Alone in the Dark languishing in the dark if you're a fan of the genre, just because some circle-jerk internet chorus believes video games are worth little unless they attain some poorly defined and often inconsistent critically acclaimed status. If this sort of hit or fail terribly mentality continues, we'll end up in an era of high production value, low risk, AAA homogeneity, a feat many large publishers have already attained with their remarkably expensive, polished and heavily marketed releases that are forgotten within a month. There's still plenty of value in lower budget and appropriately priced games that are just good, or hell, just interesting, especially when the quality of entertainment is so subjective anyway. If you've got this far, please consider giving the video a like and maybe subscribing to our channel as it helps us grow.